So when we think of the concept of education, different things come to mind. Some of us may think of a fancy diploma that we hang up somewhere in our house, or we may think of a nice graduation hat that we throw off as a celebration of our achievements. But then again, I want you to think about this quote by Mark Twain. He says he never lets his schooling get in the way of his education. However, when we think of the goal of schooling, it becomes synonymous with the goal of education. So what's the distinction that's being made here? Well, for one, we need to understand what exactly our model of learning actually is. We usually start with some textbook or lecture, eventually move on to some homework or in-class practical, and finally, the most dreaded test or exam. In this way, we can reduce this down into three simple parts: a curriculum, a kind of experimentation, and a final examination. This was established in the 1830s under the Prussian model of education. This was very significant as this was the first time education had ever been standardized in a time where scientific objectivity was very relevant. However, is it still applicable to us today? Well, one thing we can discern from this model is that it is a deductive model of learning, where we're going from a general curriculum into a more specific task, such as homework or a practical. In this way, while it has many values, we find it to be problematic in many respects. For one, we find the problem of rote memorization, which many of us are familiar with. We have the exam in a week, and we're just reading the textbook over and over and over again until the information finally sticks to us. This is not a correct approach to learning, as this is not how our brains function. Additionally, a specific fixed curriculum leads to a deficiency in interest. A student who may be interested in one thing is forced to look at something else. His predisposition is told to him by the system of schooling. Finally, we find a severe lack of incentives. Think about it. Every study, are you thinking about the long term or the short term? Are you thinking about your score on your exam? Or are you thinking about what job you're going to have and how you're going to raise a family? In this way, we have many real-world implications when it comes to this model of learning. For one, we have a lack of retention. Retention is by far the goal of learning, and when this is lacking in our current model of learning, we clearly have a problem here. And this idea of rote memorization leads to stress and burnout, as people feel overpressured by the amounts of work they need to memorize. And this has spillover effects when it comes to the time when they join the workforce. And because of this idea of rote memorization, students are forced to learn heaps of information in such a short time. And this leads them to take drugs such as Adderall in order to cope with the standards, in order to become better learners. Is this really what we want our students to be doing as ways to acquiring knowledge? Finally, a lack of commitment. As we know, we have talked about college dropouts vehemently throughout intellectual discourse. So why aren't we actually addressing the core of the problem, the way we are learning? Now, I want you to consider these two individuals. You don't need to have a physics major to know who they are. On the left, Sir Isaac Newton, and on the right, Albert Einstein. In developing his laws of mechanics, Sir Isaac Newton heavily relied on his observation. We all know about the apple falling down from the tree, for example. Additionally, Albert Einstein, through various thought experiments which were frowned down upon most of his professors, he was able to create the theory of relativity, a revolution in the field of physics. And with this, we can discuss a more inductive model of learning, where we're going from specific observations, our own experimentation, to a general curriculum. In this way, we shape the curriculum. Now, by and large, we have different ways of tackling the aforementioned problems. For one, this way of inductive learning promotes an idea known as active recall, where as opposed to just memorizing the information until it finally sticks, you're practicing, you're using the information that you already have in your brain in order to finally tackle a problem. In this way, active recall not only serves as a way of learning new information, but also as a way to diagnose what you already know, a value for students studying a specific subject matter. Additionally, with a more open-ended curriculum shaped by the individual student, we find this interest enrichment in the sense that the student is able to choose what he wants to learn. And finally, this student, as he decides what he wants to learn and what direction he wants to take, he has an incentive. He has a goal in mind in order to finally tackle a problem. Now, by and large, because of the problem of since the problem of rote memorization is largely eliminated, most of our problems here, these detrimental problems in the real world, are also solved. So why aren't we actually implementing this into our schooling system? And why aren't we ourselves, when we're studying for that exam, why aren't we trying to take these active recall methods? Well, for one, let's take a look at what methods we actually use. These are very popular strategies, as we know, highlighting, rereading, perhaps note-taking, but they're very ineffective. While you can reread information, while you can highlight information, and when you your peer tells you about it, it may sound familiar, you're not actually remembering that information. It's just sounding familiar. You want to retain that knowledge. You don't want it just to come up again and you're like, yeah, I heard about that. No, you need to remember it. Note-taking is a bit of a gray area. You can take notes effectively as long as you use them effectively. If you just take down everything your professor tells you in class and just reread them after test, you're basically doing rote memorization again. But if you use these notes to create flashcards, to create ways of discussing with your peers about the different subjects that you're taking in school, you're able to use active recall as an approach to learning. But how can we do this in specific subjects? Well, for one, in the natural sciences or the hard sciences, we can use practice. When tackling a hard mathematical problem, you need to use all the skills you've already been taught in order to approach it. And we're not talking about any math problem here. I'm not asking you to solve 1 + 1 = 2. I'm asking you to take the hardest problem you can find maybe in your textbook and trying to solve it no matter how long it takes you. Additionally, experimentation is crucial as it gives students a conceptual understanding, especially in fields such as physics or chemistry. This conceptual understanding makes people more critical thinkers, better at analysis. These are assets that we need in the real world. Finally, graphing. The natural sciences is filled with very fundamental relationships, and graphing is an effective way of understanding how these relationships work. We as humans are over-dependent on our eyesight, so why don't we use this as a tool instead of a limitation? Why don't we use visual representations in order to process information? Additionally, in the human sciences, or the social sciences, which have more of a rap of being more subjective and open-ended, an effective is debate. When I'm going into someone with a debate, I'm not expected to just lay out my argument and forget about it. Adios. No, I need to stick with it, give evidence, provide factual details, which forces me, in the form of an active recall method, to actually consider what I'm talking about, consider different implications, and make myself more of a critical thinker. However, when we talk about history, we very rarely find debates. We mainly have a teacher next to a projector giving details, you taking notes, and that's where it ends. Why don't you go outside of the class, take what you have learned, debate with your peers often, so those skills really settle in. Modeling in fields such as economics or psychology, just like in natural science, allow us to understand the fundamental relationships. But perhaps the most important of them all, and I would suggest maybe a universal strategy, is metacognition. Now, the fact that this word may sound foreign to some of you shows how unpopular it is. Metacognition is thinking about your own thinking. In this way, when we think about, okay, this is how I understood the text, you're able to diagnose what you've already learned. And when you can diagnose what you have already learned, it's largely a value added. You become a critical thinker. You become better at analysis. These are the skills which different programs in schools want you to learn, yet don't approach it properly. And we too, as individuals, need to approach this, but we aren't. Now, I want you to consider Plato here. He is one of the greatest thinkers of all time. Yet he talked about complex ideas such as philosophy and metaphysics, religion, ethics, and the list goes on. So how was he able to take these concepts and break them down so efficiently, make them accessible in fields all the way from philosophy to even physics or economics? Well, it's largely his way of discussing the different fundamental philosophical issues. He used stories. We as humans, with our tribal ancestors, are better at comprehending stories than anything else through oral traditions. This is why religion in the world has such an appeal to us, of the way it's written. We as kids are always told about stories about different people, and this is our first approach to learning. So why don't we, in the classroom or on our own when we're studying, take this similar approach to learning? Additionally, here are some cave paintings from the Cave of Lascaux in France. Art has this bad rap of being a very niche subject, specific to only people who are very good at illustrating or drawing. In this way, no one can really access it. However, art is a powerful tool. By looking at this, we can already discern many things. It's open-ended. Anyone can access it. Anyone can analyze it. Instead of having a right and wrong answer. People are more encouraged, they're more incentivized to actually learn about something. As you know in arts, there are no right or wrong answers. So why don't we use this, once again, as a tool for our learning, to encourage our students to think about different things and become better critical thinkers. Finally, William Shakespeare, perhaps revered as one of the greatest writers of all time. He used drama as a tool to talk about conflicts in power, in family relationships, etc. Once again, pretty complex things to understand. Yet by simplifying it down to a dramatization, he was able to reach a broad audience. And ultimately, isn't that the real goal of learning? Now, we've concerned with how we learn different things. But a question that is just as important, if not, I would argue, more important, is why do we learn? Do we learn for deductive motives, such as family pressure, cultural pressure, perhaps we want a certain exam score, or more inductive motives? I have a passion to learn this. I love learning, or I want to solve mysteries. In other words, what I'm trying to get at here, when you learn something, are you doing it from a societal perspective, what society expects of you, or what you expect of yourself? Who decides what you want to contribute in society? Is it us, the individual, or society? In this way, when I present the symbol, it is not a symbol of our achievements. It is not a symbol for education. It is a symbol of you. It is a symbol of me. It is a symbol of individual learning, a lifelong pursuit.